On today's World Insight, Korean Peninsula diplomacy in action, with China's top envoy on a visit to South Korea for talks. What's on the agenda? And over half a year of the coronavirus pandemic brought big changes to our lives. How did artists, in pursuit of their craft, get used to this new normal? A visit to 798 Art Zone.
Nothing's canceled, but everything's postponed, right? Obviously, it's not all.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin today's program on relations between China and South Korea. From Friday to Saturday, China's senior diplomat Yang Jiechi is traveling to Busan for consultations. The trip comes amid the pandemic and stalled denuclearization talks. According to ROK's presidential office, the two sides, quote, plan to exchange opinions on issues of mutual concern, such as coronavirus response, cooperation, bilateral relations, including high-level exchanges, as well as the Korean Peninsula and international security situations, end quote. Earlier in May, the two countries agreed on a fast-track entry system for travelers while ensuring adequate epidemic prevention and control to keep business and supply chains open. For more on Yang Jiechi's trip to South Korea, we are joined in Seoul by Yunjung Lim, Associate Professor from the Division of International Studies at Kongju National University. In Beijing, Zhou Rong, Senior Analyst from Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Welcome to both of you. How should we understand this latest trip, still amid the challenges of COVID-19? Ms. Lim.
Yes, you're very right. As you already know, the situation in Seoul is getting worse every day. So we're really concerned about the further further development of the COVID-19, not only just in Seoul, nationwidely, but amid this crisis, I think the majority of Korean people are very excited to watch Mr. Yang's special visit to Busan. Some actually experts shared some kind of concerns as well, because we all know U.S.-China, China-U.S. rivalry is getting more intense. So amid that kind of rivalry getting intense, again, what if South Korea required to choose either one of them? That's the worst scenario for South Korea. So obviously we do have some concerns, but at the same time we are very excited to see Mr. Yang's visit.
As you may know, there's a lot on the agenda, Mr. Zhou from China, both the COVID-19, the fight against the pandemic, and of course the peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula, bilateral relations, including high-level exchanges, Korean Peninsula, international security situation. These, according to the latest points coming from the two foreign ministries, have been illustrated. So what do you think is the most important agenda of Mr. Yang's trip?
I think first we should like to say South Korea is one of the strongest countries in Asia. If we just include the Asia's powers, China, Japan, India, and South Korea are the most important countries in Asia. And we also know that South Korea is ranking ninth of the world economy. It's the ninth developed country in the world. And also that between China and South Korea, there's a lot of trade between the two countries. China just take 20% of the whole South Korea overall foreign trade. So it is important. And we also know that during the pandemic of COVID-19, there's a lot of cloud meeting and the video conference, which cannot be replaced by face-to-face meeting. So face-to-face meeting is very important. So Yang's trip is going to discuss something about the bilateral relationship, also exchange some, some counter COVID experiences and also may do some preparation for the future possible summit between South Korea and China.
The COVID-19 situation, China and South Korea were early in the pandemic, but later, with utmost efforts made by both sides, managed to come out of it. Now, there are some cluster of outbreaks since then in South Korea. How strong is the momentum now to still curb the pandemic? And how much do you think international cooperation, particularly with China, will be able to help Seoul to solve some of the problems?
Yes. You might remember when the first outbreak did happen here in this country. It was approximately around February and March in the city of Daegu.
Yes.
But this actually current wave is pretty like equally, I mean, we have pretty equal concerns about the recent actually development in Seoul, because obviously Seoul is the capital city, the largest city of the country. So obviously we have deep concerns about the situation. So the government strongly encourages people to follow the directions and discourage people's gathering even over the weekend. So people are trying to follow, of course, the government's directions.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed. I also want to just remain optimistic about the situations, but we still don't know. We cannot be that sure as of now. So we definitely need to be cautious about the upcoming weeks at least. So having had that situation, another bigger concern is, again, the economy. As Mr. Zhou said, China, Korea, China, especially from Korea's point of view, China is the largest trading partner, and the massive number of Chinese tourists have visited Korea. So that was a huge part of our GDP. But these days, we really have troubles because of all the situations. So definitely we probably need to have a deeper conversation over how we can block the COVID outbreak, but at the same time, how can really we the recover economic ties between the two. I think Mr. Yang obviously will try to have the conversation about that.
Right.
Again, the relationship between economy and COVID.
Yes. Mr. Zhou, of
Yes.
course, China was early in the fire. And now there's a lot of different new development. One is a vaccine. The other is how to do the containment and prevention if the cluster of outbreak happened. Obviously, so far, China seems to do quite well with the latest few small outbreaks. And also, what's going to be the international cooperation in terms of fight and prevention against COVID-19 is not clear. Can this trip, or paving the way at least, for some kinds of mechanism among neighboring countries to cooperate, some kinds of platforms for procedures, mechanisms, and the way of doing things? Mr. Zhou.
Yeah. Yes, right now it's going to establish the post-COVID bilateral relationship model. That is to say, instead of using cloud meeting and video conference, we initiate post-COVID face-to-face meeting between the neighboring countries, not only between South Korea and China, but in the future should re-emerge the new round of the South Korea, Japan, and China's triangle meetings. And also that is for the cooperation, not only cooperation on some traditional area, but also for the digital economy, for cloud economy, for some other eco economy, which area we need to explore a little bit further. So I hope you know that there are 20,000 Korean Peninsula, Korean companies stayed in China. I think there should be another 20,000 companies from China do investment in South Korea. So the cooperation between the two need to be deepened and broadened. Thank you.
On some of the points you just mentioned, let me go through one by one, some of the most important ones.
Yeah.
First of all, security, geopolitics. We can't hide away from this reality. Now, with at least the election in the United States, we're going to see several months of even more intense U.S. Pressure against China and probably pressure against the U.S. Allies going against China. So that's, Ms. Lim, what you have just put. South Korea does not want to be pushed into a corner and have to choose which one, whether it's with the United States. But one of the issue is about the security. You have latest in South Korea, 253 billion defense budget, and also purchasing of the latest weapons, including some of the newest models of jets and building of missile systems. Earlier, China, South Korea were already in some heated debate months ago about anti-missile defense system that the U.S. wanted South Korea to install in your country. How should we understand the latest situation?
Very, very unfortunately, especially after the Hanoi summit, the nuclear situations, again, North Korea's that nuclear program didn't show any good developments to the rest of the world. We are very disappointed, frustrated as well. And as you remember, a few months ago, the Kaesong liaison was like exploded by North, which was, of course, shocking, painful to watch for any South Korean citizens. My point is, as long as North Korea's that nuclear problem is still on the table, you know, U.S. can have, I'm sorry to say like this way, but can have a good reasons to bring in all this like a strategic defense system. And from South Korea's point of view too, we don't have nuclear weapon, and if you consider all this like asymmetry between the North and South, even though we are richer and even though our military is much more modernized, but one nuclear can just, you know, change all the games. So as long as, again, that situation doesn't change, you know, South Korea can always like, you know, have not that many options, except all this, you know, strategic cooperation with our ally, the U.S. Of course, that's not that good news, not only just to us, or of course to the China, or to the peace of the East Asia. So I truly hope Mr. Yang can have deeper conversation with the South Korean counterparts about the future of the North Korea's that nuclear program too.
China has been the go-betweener, Mr. Zhou, between North and South and between North Korea and the rest of the world, but China is now the decision maker for policies for Pyongyang. However, China could play a role, given the very reasonable analysis provided by Ms. Lin from the South Korean perspective. What is China's take now and way of doing things now at a time when we still have this pandemic, when we see geopolitics is becoming the biggest topic, probably, as we go on?
Let's say first about the first question you asked, Madam Lin. The one thing that is something you talk about, whether South Korea will stay together with the USA or will be neutral. My point of view is South Korea will always be neutral. South Korea is not like Japan, always stay together with America against China. South Korea never does so. This is number one point. Another point is China has maintained a very sound and good relationship with both South Korea and DPK and North Korea. I think China can just do as something like a middleman or the coordinators between South Korea and North Korea if they have some requests. But I'm sure that between South Korea and North Korea, the coordination instrument right now is, what do we say, certainly cut. But I am sure that in the future, seeing the situation, and that kind of instrument will be restored very soon.
We see the U.S. playing a relatively interesting role over the past few years. On the one hand, this administration, especially this president, have been eager to have some personal achievement in having iconic footages, but at the same time has failed to deliver, at least according to North Korea's perspective, about an earlier consensus. On the other hand, we also see that the foreign policy circle inside the U.S. is very divided about what to do with the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time want to pressure Seoul further away from China and closer to the U.S. for U.S. own geopolitical goals. So there's a very entangled vision that the U.S. has in mind, which of course will have its impact on how they're trying to deal with Seoul, and also on China's approach to Seoul as well, because China needs to function also within this framework about how to deal with the U.S. and what to do next with its neighbors and countries of cooperation. So, Ms. Lim, that puts a lot of pressure for vision for South Korea about what to do and how to tread every step along the way when everything, when not handled well, could be a trap.
Yeah, that's very right. As you say, again, from Pyongyang's point of view, or North Korea's that so-called Kim regime's priority is they definitely want to deal with the United States directly. I'm very sorry to say like this way, but they don't prioritize Korea, South Korea, neither South Korea nor actually China. And I'm very sorry to say like this.
It's a reality.
Again, the first priority.
It's very obvious that Pyongyang wants to directly deal with Washington, but they also hope this direct interaction could bring results. But so far, it has failed. That's the issue.
Yeah, that's right. And we do see all this like a deep gap between Washington's perspective, Pyongyang's perspective, but still Pyongyang, they want to deal with Washington directly without probably Seoul and even without the Beijing. So that's really the kind of fundamental problem, all this complicating game. But as you said, China's role, as Mr. Zhou said, again, definitely China's role is really big when we are trying to persuade the Pyongyang. I think it can be bigger than the Seoul because even though our president and our government is eager to solve this problem, but as long as the Pyongyang's priority list like that, our role can be somewhat limited as well. So in that sense, I do see this Mr. Yang's visit as very encouraging for us too, because now probably again Beijing-Seoul's cooperation is really, I think, also necessary as for this moment.
Mr. Zhou, U.S. election coming up, people are really concerned whether some crazy cards will be played by politicians just to increase their electability. So how vulnerable will the Korean Peninsula be during this time? And how is China framing the timeline and its bigger vision of working with its neighbors?
Yes, we all know the Chinese Foreign Minister recently just made a speech that China will still continue its cooperation with current American government. We will not wait for election time, but anyway, it is America who should just do some initiative work for the stability and the peace of the peninsula. I think China is not like America. China never put any kind of extra pressures on North Korea, and both North Korea and South Korea. But America just put pressure on both. So for China may just try to smooth the channel to make some dialogue address for both South Korea and North Korea. But to initiate some new proposal, I think we need to wait and see, because first is we should just make relax between North Korea and America. Then that is make relax between North Korea and South Korea. It will take some time to do the work. Thank you.
But will the current environment, allow that work to happen?
They don't like to, North Korea don't like to have any dialogue with America. They don't want to be the card played by Trump for his election. I suppose North Korea would like to wait until the election result of America.
A lot of things are going on right now, but also about the next stage. How should we see South Korea and China find each other on the overall regional and world map?
No matter whether there's a tension in the peninsula, I think that is China and South Korea have never seen their cooperation, not only on geopolitical cooperation, but also on science, technology, and economy. No matter what kind of happened from United States, and we three will just stay together for the peace and the stability. Thank you.
Ms. Lim, what's your thought?
Yes, thank you. Again, as long as the North Korea's nuclear problem remains unsolved, I think all those Korean Peninsula related issues can be used as a good reason or as the justification for further escalation between the continental power and the Pacific power. So as long as we share this concern together against South Korea and China or even other country, I truly hope we can sit down together and have a deeper conversation and work for the peace of the region.
I want to thank both of you for your input. Yunzhang Lim, Joe Rong, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight. Coming up on our program, over half a year of the coronavirus pandemic brought big changes to our lives. How did artists in pursuit of their craft get used to this new normal? I visit the Beijing 798 Art Zone and I chat with the artists there. Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Worldwide, countless exhibitions and art shows have been cancelled or postponed due to COVID-19. But now that the threat of a pandemic has become a reality for people from all corners of the world, how can creators of works of art, the artists, help in the global response? As the coronavirus forces us to endure an unprecedented time of social distancing, how do artists and audiences cope with this new normal? Bearing all these questions in mind, I paid a visit to 798 Art Zone in Beijing and talked to artists and curators there for some answers. We are all in this unprecedented experience of a global pandemic. While we are trying to struggle with the uncertainties of daily life, we also try to come to terms with what the new normal means for all of us, today and possibly forever. That's why we come to art, for rescue, for guidance, and hopefully even some joy. Right here in downtown Beijing, an art exhibition, Meditations in Emergency. Hopefully there will be some answers inside. All these artworks were created before the big pandemic, but they managed to speak to us in a different way now, thanks to the exhibit curators who presented them in a new light. While doing the rounds, Vivek Tinari, the director of the UCCA Center for Contemporary Art, gave me his take on why these works are up for another closer look.
No, this artist, Oliver Larrick, based in Berlin, very associated with this group of artists in the early 2000s, 2010s called post-internet. So they were really the first artists to start thinking about how much of our lives we live online and what that does to our minds. But here he's creating all these connections, visual connections between different forms, morphing, right? Things turn into one another. And what you really have is, I think what's interesting to note is you go from human to kind of non-human figures. So people aren't the protagonist necessarily, turn into a dog or a horse and back into a person and on. Because really this whole section of the show, these artists in this part, it's the middle kind of pivotal section, are all in one way or another exploring the relationship between human and animal.
Yes. And actually, we are just part of the world, the animal world in a way.
Of course, and this is one of the, again, like lessons of the pandemic, right? I mean, regardless of what you think about its origins, we know that this virus is found not only in humans, but in other strains of animals as well, right? So it's, I think we definitely have been forced to reconsider our place in this ecological system. And
for artists like these, we also see them and their works in ordinary days, but now it's a very different layer of what they're trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think this piece is a great example of that, right? It was made long before the pandemic, but yeah, suddenly we reconsider this context and these relationships, and it just takes on a whole new meaning.
Exactly. I know you have a lot of other works to show me around.
Sure, let's keep going.
Okay, great.
Good. Zhang Peili, is one of the real heroes of the Chinese avant-garde. We call him the father of video art. He was the first person to make that kind of work back in the 80s already. But this is a much more recent project, still before the pandemic. Last year, he started going to Carrara, the quarry in Italy, where Michelangelo and all the great sculptors of the Renaissance got their marble. But actually what he did is he took a CT scan of his whole body, and then using 3D printing created molds based on this, and then basically
so these
sculpted.
Are all
these are his bones.
Oh wow!
Yeah, basically, or like life-size images or replicas of his own bones. If you put it together, you'd have a whole skeleton
of Zhang Peili.
Of Zhang Peili. More about him than you ever want to know.
Yeah.
But no, I think I love this piece because while death and mortality are such common topics in art, going back through the ages.
Right.
But for him to encounter this so directly, I think during this pandemic, all of us thought at one point or another about our own mortality.
And these are interesting.
Yeah. So here you have the bones, and then there you have these solids. They represent the same weight as the amount in his body of fat, of blood, and of water. So they're, these materials, crystal versus marble, different weights and densities, so you need a bigger size. But it's a very precise exhibition. He's trying to represent himself in an honest and systematic and scientific kind of way.
Philip showed me around and introduced me to Zhang Hui, an artist who has a unique eye for people in uniforms. Now his old works about nurses are shown in a different light. That's fascinating, not only to the audience, but even the artist himself.
像有些特殊性的行家，比如医院呐，飞机是一个航空。
Some special environments, like hospitals, airports, these places have professional characteristics, not an ordinary environment. I think it can be analyzed and researched as a subject using the method of drawing. So I created this work.
所以呢，就是画了这个。
我看到您这个作品是在18年。
I saw it was painted in 2018. This time, we see the efforts that a lot of medical workers have done in this epidemic. Do viewers have more empathy?
因为大量的就媒体在报道，在这些护士很牛、很棒、很奉献，然后。
Because a lot of media are reporting the dedication and sacrifice of medical workers, many people find these works resonating with them emotionally. At this special time, this exhibition uses such a presentation to consolidate the multidimensional and multi-angle thinkings from several artists to reflect on the current special situation. I think it's particularly good. This kind of empathy makes people feel they are indistinguishable from each other when they come here, and the part between the wall of the museum and the outside world is eliminated, making it a huge museum.
As an artist, do you think there is a great relationship with the pandemic, your life, your work?
之前觉得很多以为是。
Many things I thought it was an analytical reality before, but now it seems that the reality is a personal assumption and a little illusory. This epidemic has brought me back. It turns out that reality still has so many dimensions and so many things that are usually shielded. This outbreak suddenly makes things more real. After experiencing the epidemic, my thinking is more real than before. I will slow down myself and chew on every piece of my work. I will study every piece of work again and again. I don't want to be rushed or reject experience. I want to be as comprehensive as possible.
尽可能的周全一点的工作。
Philip, good to see you.
Great to be back.
Meditations in an Emergency, Frank O'Hara, wow.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously a great American poet of the mid-century. He only lived to be 40 years old. And actually, during his lifetime, he was more famous as an art curator than as a poet. He was a curator at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art. And you know, his poetry is so beautiful. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but he uses ordinary language. So it's almost like pop art, you know, but in poetry, in literary form. Some of his poems, there's one called "Having a Coke with You." But of course, Meditations in an Emergency is the name of a poem, but also of a collection of poems that he published in the 1960s.
Why is that phrase so much what you wanted for this exhibition?
Nothing's canceled, but everything's postponed, right? Obviously, it's not a time to make a show with a big budget, with a big team coming from abroad. So we had to suddenly think of a new exhibition to reopen with. And you know, what else is on everyone's mind right now but the situation? I mean, it would have felt wrong to do
anything else,
a so-called normal show in these very abnormal times. So what was really great about it was it gave the team a chance to really use their minds and their eyes and their sort of curatorial muscles. So I basically put them in a room and said, you guys have 1 week, you know, let's come up with a proposal. It gave us a bit of advice. I'll take credit for the title, nothing else. The selection of the artists, the presentation, the design, it was really all done by us. It's a 6-person curatorial team, very outstanding young Chinese curators, but so many other people from the communications to the design to the production that get involved. And it was really a chance for us, you know, there's this Frank O'Hara quote about, in times of crisis, you must decide again and again who you love, right? And not just who you love, but kind of what you love and who you are. And you know, it really makes you confront these big questions.
And many of their works actually is pre-2020 January.
Almost all of them.
Almost all of them. And yet they have very new significance now.
Absolutely.
Did you open a new eyes to things that you have not noticed before as much as you did now?
It's not like you're choosing the winner of a prize. No. You're thinking more just, how can I put things together in a way that's interesting, that will make them appear in a new light, and that will bring out their connections to this present moment. Because of course, with such little time, no one's making a new piece of art, in very few cases. I mean, 1 or 2 pieces are brand new. The rest are existing. Even the paintings of Zhang Hui, you know, these 2 nurses wearing masks. Actually, it's the same nurse, and of this nurse with her mask. It's actually from 2018. But you know, put in this time where we're all wearing masks all the time, it takes on this new significance. And I think that's the thing about important art, is that it can mean something different at different times.
Its relevancy is always there.
Absolutely.
But it takes eyes to discover those relevancies. And it also takes echoes, you know, among the curators and artists at a different time in order to find those relevancies.
And of course, yeah, and it's a conversation, and we're always, you know, maybe we would approach an artist and say, we're very interested in this piece that you made, and they would say, well, actually, okay, I see what you're trying to do here, because we had a document just kind of explaining our concept, and they'd say, actually, this piece, I think, makes more sense. And we would say, aha, you're right.
Which one did you discover during the process?
So there's a wonderful young, he's originally Lebanese. I believe he's based in the UK now, called Lawrence Abu Hamdan. And he made this beautiful video where he's talking about walls. And we were thinking of him in all kinds of different contexts. He was one of the winners of the Turner Prize this year. It's a very important prize given by the Tate in London. And you know, at this time when, you know, our American president has spent 4 years trying to build a wall, and when kind of borders are suddenly more important than they were before, this meditation of his about what is a wall kind of started to seem quite important for this show.
This is really what I want to ask you about the so-called new normal. We all have to deal with it. We all have to form it in a way. What is the new normal that you can describe verbally to us? as a curator, as an art institution director?
You know, I mean, I've been very lucky. I've worked almost my whole career in China. I'm American, as you can tell, or as you know. And it's been amazing to watch the art scene develop here and to watch it become so international. Even in this moment of different kinds of tension, I think it can show what's possible. And it can allow our viewers and our different stakeholders, it can be a way of reminding ourselves that there are these possibilities for a different kind of understanding. This piece of Amico Lee, and it's actually really this very serious meditation about his time in a hospital. He had a skin problem, and so he was studying in the US, and he spent all kinds of time in and out of the hospital. He made this environment. We'll go look at it. I mean, I'll show you, but you look around, and what it's become known for online are, you know, there's these kind of very fun red arches and this blue carpet. The colors are dramatic, and there are these elements from like Chinese traditional medicine, you know, mannequins scattered around. But then you look on the walls, and it's this kind of photographic essay about his illness and recovery and all these different questions that raised. And that's one of the sections of the show, is really talking about, you know, how the pandemic kind of brought us all into closer relationship to our own mortality.
And our own body.
Our own body, yeah.
Our own life, in a way.
Indeed.
The other thing is how people are wondering, we are learning, listening, feeling, touching, smelling, all these senses, how our senses are opened up as a result of a totally new normal these days. I guess in the art world, it could be also a reflection of that.
I think we just become so much more attuned to our immediate environment. You know, and that's the first section of the exhibition. It's called The Fragile Everyday, and the inspiration for that was really this idea that we were all going through at one point where, you know, people stayed at home for 1 month, 2 months, in the case of people in Wuhan, almost half a year, right, and never leaving. And so suddenly, on the one hand, you know, what you thought of as everyday routine before completely upset and rearranged, and on the other hand, you have this like just incredibly deep relationship to your surroundings, the people around you, and even the objects and the spaces that are around you. And that's a very artistic process. You think about artists like Bruce Nauman, was an important American artist from the 60s, who made these videos where he would just walk around his studio kind of in a circle again and again. Or I think about the Taiwanese-born American artist Xie Xie, who, you know, in the 80s in New York was making these pieces. Like he made one piece where he lived for 1 whole year in a cage, yes, or where he punched a time card every hour for a whole year. So I think these kinds of
there's a whole series of works related.
Yeah, not in this show, but I mean, there's, you know, artists have been guides for us
to be with themselves.
To be with themselves and to think about kind of, you know, putting themselves in kind of very extreme circumstances and situations. That's always been something that, you know, modern and contemporary artists have done.
Are the artists, or is the art world the fortune teller or the historian? Wow. In other words, do they know more than we do before it happens, or do they only, in conclusion, trying to draw us to something?
I honestly, this is going to sound like it's really both, because I think artists, you know, their job is to see things, and that's what they do all day, and so it's kind of natural that they can sometimes do that before the rest of us. So many times you see ideas that kind of come to the fore in artistic production, and that later kind of make their way into the broader society. I mean, think about like American artist Adrian Piper, who did a lot of really cutting-edge work about identity and race and stereotyping and these things. You know, in the 80s, I was already talking about these issues. You look at the work now, and it feels like it was made yesterday. You know, in the context of all the recent events in the U.S. Yeah. At the same time, you know, why is it? One thing I did during this period was kind of rewrote our values, like of our team and of our institution. And the very last, you know, sort of item, I mean, I asked myself, you know, why? You know, I could have been a journalist or done all these other things too, right? But for me, art is so convincing, because I think when we're all gone, a few 100,000 years from now, You know, and we look back at previous civilizations and what's really left to us. You know, of course, some artifacts and things, but it's really the art, right? It's really the way that we are able to understand the people who came before us. So, yeah, working with artists is such a great way to stay in touch with, you know, really what it is that makes us all human.
Phil, thank you so much for hosting us.
Great to be here together. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.